Welcome to lectures and interviews about leadership for sustainability. I'm Bruce Hall. One of the implications of identity protective reasoning and confirmation bias is that you probably won't change someone's mind with just using facts, no matter how well versed you are in state-of-the-art science. Because of confirmation bias, whoever you're arguing with will just find other facts. And because of identity protective reasoning, that person's not even arguing about facts. Instead, they're protecting identity. So what does that mean for you, an expert, trained in all the best facts? What are you to do if facts don't matter? And that's not your biggest challenge. Research shows that brighter, better educated people are more likely to strongly hold and better defend positions such as climate denial. This makes sense if you think about it from the perspective of confirmation bias and identity protective reasoning. Because of being better educated and having an aptitude for finding information, the better and brighter educated people are actually better equipped to find information that confirms their bias. And within an echo chamber, these people will be pressured and rewarded to be thought leaders because they can best protect the group's identity. And here's the real kicker. These are exactly the people you need to target. Okay, I've debated many people who are skeptical of climate change and have to admit that I've never won. And I know a lot about climate science. I teach it in classes. I work with climate scientists. I've got lots of facts, but a clever, well-read climate skeptic knows something I don't. They've got some study, some logic, some arcane fact that they use, and I'm unfamiliar with it, and they use that as evidence to them that they know the facts better than I do, and that climate change isn't happening. And the only way I've made any progress is to focus on identity, not facts. I do this by asking them, what organizations do they trust? Do they trust the military? Do they trust business? And if they do, then I explain that, well, those organizations are acting in ways as if climate is changing. As they're actually investing money, putting boots on the ground, changing the way their facilities are run, as if climate is changing. And those organizations can buy the very best science, right? They know the stuff better than anybody else. And so if they think climate is changing, maybe you should too. And that line of argument only gets me so far, but it at least gets them to pause and opens up the opportunity for more discussion. And notice it's not using facts at all. It's just using identity as the trigger to get the conversation going. Facts don't work. The reason I'm suggesting you target group leaders instead of group members is because members are much less invested in the facts. They just support the party line, so no amount of facts will matter. They won't even listen. They don't care. Research shows that people's beliefs are like clusters of grapes. The beliefs tend to cluster together. People may know a lot about one or two of the grapes and be able to debate the facts there, but for most of the other grapes, most of the other issues, they just buy the party line. So the cluster of values or beliefs might be pro-gun rights, anti-abortion, skeptical of climate change, skeptical of the United Nations, pro-death penalty, not too supportive of environmental regulation or welfare, very much pro-market, anti-tax. These things cluster together. While beliefs that tend to cluster together on the other side of the political aisle include pro-climate action, pro-gun control, pro-choice, pro-affirmative action, anti-GMOs, okay with government regulation of business, and so on. So instead of focusing on the group member, you need to focus on the leader, because once you change their opinion, then the group members will follow, because they'll just go along with the party line. But that, of course, is a very difficult ask, in part because the experts, the thought leaders know a lot of facts, probably more than most of us, and because, remember from the discussion of echo chambers, that if you publicly question the group dogma, then you risk being shunned and shamed and losing your reputation and job and opportunities and being expelled from the group. Let me describe a pretty famous example. Jerry Taylor was employed as a spokesperson for climate skepticism by the Cato Institute, a leading conservative think tank. Yet he changed his mind on climate. He changed his mind when he realized he was misrepresenting the science and economics of climate change. he was motivated to do this not because of the facts, but because his identity was less about being a political conservative or a climate skeptic and more about being an independent, critical advisor to policymakers. That is, his expertise, his identity was wrapped up in being somebody who translated science into policy. So again, it wasn't the facts that matter, but his identity did. So his identity of being an expert, a science policy expert, was more important than being a conservative. I strongly recommend that you listen to the interview with Taylor that can be found on the podcast Reckonings. Let me give you one more example, this time focusing on food, specifically meat eating, beef in particular. It uses huge amounts of land, water, and petroleum. Habitat gets cleared of its native biodiversity, aquifers get depleted, climate change accelerates. If cattle were a nation, they would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases, just behind the US and China. Rather than eating meat, people could consume the same calories and nutrition for a fraction of the environmental impact by just changing their diets and eating the plants directly instead of feeding those plants to animals and then eating the animals. This means that by reducing meat consumption, we may have one of the biggest impacts possible on sustainable development. But changing what people eat is extremely difficult to do. Few people will be persuaded by these facts, but identity can trigger change. Two organizations, one called Changing Taste, the other Menus of Change, are trying to do just that. They are working with culinary professionals to promote plant-forward diets. In particular, they are targeting chefs because chefs tend to be hyper-aware of trends, popularity, rankings, and reputation. So a few charismatic chefs can be recruited, and they become celebrities, and if they endorse plant-forward practices, that makes these practices cool and hip and in. Other chefs, restaurants, and foodies cooking at home aspire to be in the in-group and will do the same thing. They'll use the same recipes and entries and ingredients. So just a few celebrity chefs will recruit other chefs who will inspire foodies, who will inspire regular customers, and menus change, recipes change, tastes change, and the amount of meat people eat changes. Now, I admit I've given you a difficult charge. Don't use your facts, target elites, and if at all possible, trigger identity. So one quick lesson that works pretty easily is called to affirm self-worth. It's affirmation. If you make people feel good about themselves, then they're more likely to lean in your direction. You want to get them to like your elephant. And so if you pay them a compliment, say something about how well they did well on this last project, or they really made a contribution to the community effort, they start to feel good about themselves, and they start to like you, and they're more likely to then accept, or at least listen to the difficult, controversial topics that you want to discuss. So one way to use and trigger identity is to affirm other people, to make them feel confident in themselves so they don't feel so defensive that they need to defend their group identity.